For 70 years together, we've understood and protected the Constitution. The important thing here is not to change the Constitution, but to let it continue to serve its purpose. The Constitution must not be changed.
Protesters in Japan say the Prime Minister wants to rewrite the Constitution, and they're not happy about it. Demonstrators who are deeply aware of the country's military past say their post-war commitment to peace is of utmost importance. The current Constitution came into effect after World War II and rejects war as a way to settle diplomatic disputes. Japan has an army of about 250,000 active duty troops, but it exists solely for self-defense. In 2014, Japan reinterpreted the law to allow their armed forces to serve in peacekeeping missions overseas. The government now says the law needs a new clause to protect the role of the self-defense forces. But some fear Shinzo Abe's administration is using fears over North Korea and China as an excuse to revive militarism. Well, from Washington, D.C., I'm joined by Andrew Oros. He's a Japan specialist and the author of Japan's Security Renaissance. Thanks so much for joining us. Andrew, interesting that you call it a renaissance. Is what Prime Minister Abe wants to do in line with what the majority of Japanese people want, that they need a change and they want to go away from pacifism?
Well, what Prime Minister Abe is seeking to do is not to move away from pacifism, but to create a more robust self-defense force that's more capable of creating deterrence against North Korea, against China, and other Japanese threats. So I think that what we see in elections is that Prime Minister Abe's general approach is very widely supported. His party has by far the largest support rate of any party in Japan.
And to what extent are those who say, hey, Imperial Japan did terrible things, it did unspeakable things, and it brought ruin upon us. Our major cities were nuked and firebombed. We don't want this to happen again. To what extent are those voices noisy, and to what extent can they stop him from this 2020 vision?
Well, Japan is a democracy, and so what the people want is generally what will happen. It gets filtered through the Liberal Democratic Party, the ruling party in Japan. And so I think that the people's voices are very strong. And we've seen this since Prime Minister Abe became Prime Minister at the end of 2012. Many of the things that he sought to do were watered down significantly, including the reinterpretation of the Constitution, which, as you mentioned, happened in 2014 and then was put into a series of new laws in 2015. What was actually enacted into the law in 2015 was quite a bit different than what Mr. Abe had originally sought, and I think that shows the power of the public in these debates.
Yeah, just over 2 years on, that collective self-defense reinterpretation, has it been seen as a success? Do the Japanese generally see their peacekeeping roles as valuable and valid?
Yeah, I think that here's a factoid about post-war Japan that's very strong in Japanese memory. Not a single Japanese soldier or aviator, sailor has died in combat in over 70 years. And Japanese people are very proud of that, and they're not keen to see their soldiers go into war. And they'll go to the streets to protest that. And I think that's something that Prime Minister Abe and his party are very aware of. So that kind of departure of Japan fighting side by side with the United States or other allies all around the world, I think is totally unthinkable in contemporary Japan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but then, so soldiers are not dying, but when, for example, ISIS, executes 2 Japanese hostages, which side wins? Or, when it swings on the spectrum, which way does it go? Does it increase the case of those who say, hey, we need a more robust, stronger constitution, or does it strengthen the case of the pacifists?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the specific point of the Constitution, because that's what sort of made this a news story recently, right? It was last week on the 70th anniversary of the Constitution that Prime Minister Abe said in an interview that he wanted to see the Constitution changed by 2020, which is the year of the Tokyo Olympics. But what I think is important to stress is that he himself did not say that he wanted to erase the Article 9 of Japan's constitution that prohibits war potential, that prohibits the state to use force to settle international disputes. He said that he wanted to amend to add that to acknowledge that Japan in fact has one of the most capable militaries in the world today, which they call their self-defense forces. And what he wants to see is the Constitution to say explicitly that these self-defense forces are a part of Japan's post-war identity and that they are constitutional. Because some legal scholars still question whether these self-defense forces are constitutional or not. So what I would say in sum is that what Prime Minister Abe seeks to do, at least what he says that he seeks to do, is to make the Constitution match with the reality that Japan is one of the major military powers of the world today.
Yeah, Constitution matching with reality. Some would call that pragmatism. With a belligerent North Korea, with a growing China that might be expansionist, what about the fears that there are those who say, hold on, we're not too worried about you maybe defending yourself if North Korea or China attack you, but we're afraid you're going to take preemptive strikes. Is there anything in what Abe wants to do that suggests that he wants Japan to take preemptive strikes?
Well, there is a discussion in Japan about preemptive strikes recently. This is why I titled my recent book, Japan's Security Renaissance, because I think what's happened in the last 10 years in Japan is a big change society-wide about what you're able to discuss and what you're not able to discuss. There were a lot of taboos in Japan in the post-war period about things that you just couldn't talk about in the media, and one of them was, should Japan have preemptive strike capabilities? This is now something that is being discussed in Washington just last week at a major conference. The former Japanese defense minister said that he supported this idea as part of a study group. So it is something that is being discussed. I don't think it's something that's politically viable at the moment, but I think it's important that it's being openly discussed, just like other issues like whether Japan should have nuclear weapons or not, whether Japan should have longer range weapons capabilities.
Okay, fascinating points. Intriguing country. I wish I actually understood Japanese to get a deeper dive, but it was great learning from you, Andrew Oros. Thanks so much for joining us.